Five key risks highlighted by Jerome Powell that investors must not ignore. While there were no surprises in the U.S. Federal Reserve's policy decision on Wednesday, May 7th, Chair Jerome Powell issued clear warnings for investors. The growth inflation dynamics in the world's largest economy appear murky, and the worst may still yet to come. The U.S. Federal Reserve's FOMC, Federal Open Market Committee, decided to keep the key benchmark interest rates unchanged at 4.25 to 4.5% and flagged growing risks stemming from President Donald Trump's aggressive tariff policy regime. Gosh, I cannot talk today. Holding interest rates steady for the fourth consecutive meeting, the Fed chair indicated the possibility of a rate cut could be remote because of prevailing uncertainty over the economic fallout of Trump's tariffs. Let's take a look at the five key risks flagged by Jerome Powell that investors should not ignore. Number one, the economy. More pain could be in the offing. The U.S. economy could experience more pain in the coming months due to increased uncertainty. Powell said that while the U.S. economy is in good shape, the elevated risks of uncertainties related to the economic outlook still prevail. Uncertainty about the economic outlook has increased further. The committee is attentive to the risks to both sides of its dual mandate and judges that the risks of higher unemployment and higher inflation have risen, said the Fed statement. So, what it's referring to, the committee is attentive to the risks to both sides of its dual mandate. Okay, the dual. This is very specific language. The Federal Reserve has what's called a dual mandate. They have two goals they are trying to achieve. They're trying to minimize unemployment and minimize inflation as much as possible. And both of those are connected to interest rates. The Federal Reserve has one tool at its disposal, one single lever it can pull, and that is interest rates, raising them higher or lower. There is literally nothing else the Federal Reserve is responsible for. And so they spend all of their time researching and ensuring if it's the right move to increase or decrease the interest rate in relation to how inflation is looking and how unemployment is looking and how actuarial tables suggest they're going to look in the next coming 6 months or so. Trump wants, as far as I understand it, he wants interest rates lowered just like without any, unsurprisingly, without any serious economic consideration, because he sees it as the economy going hot. It makes money cheaper. It makes it much easier to take loans. Makes it much easier to invest in projects. And so in that sense, I think he just sort of blindly assumes like the more we can maximize the economy in that sense, the better. But that is not actually the case. Because if you overcook the economy, it has some serious negative consequences, one of which being inflation, right? It typically, when you pull the lever one way, it's going to decrease the unemployment rate, but increase inflation. And typically, when you pull the lever the other way, it's going to decrease inflation, but increase the unemployment rate. So it's important to have a level head and to have a thorough analysis of why and to exactly what rate you would raise it to, and to not just be like lowering the rate will increase inflation, as far as I understand it. Hold on, let me look that up. Okay, yeah, so this totally makes sense. Lowering interest rates generally increases inflation and decreases unemployment. This is because lower rates make borrowing cheaper, which encourages spending and investment, leading to higher demand and potentially higher prices. At the same time, increased demand can lead businesses to hire more workers, reducing unemployment. So, yeah, so lowering interest rates is like it's the classic short-term gain at the expense of long-term planning. Um, he might see like if he were to get his wish and artificially lower the interest rate lower than what the Fed determines is the correct spot, he would see probably a year or two of a really hot economy that seems like it's doing well, like the GDP is growing, like probably the stock market would do well and all that jazz. But eventually it would all come to a serious head when the inflation like became a serious problem. And you can get unemployment too low, right? You want a certain amount of you want, I think the sweet spot is somewhere around 2, 3, 5% unemployment, you don't want the unemployment rate at a complete zero, just like you don't want inflation at a zero. The target inflation rate is 2% for a very specific reason. If you got zero inflation rate or a negative inflation rate, it would immediately trigger a recession and likely a full-on Great Depression. So just like unemployment and inflation, they both have a target rate that they're going for, and that just try to maximize or minimize them without any further regard is really short-sighted. The U.S. GDP contracted at a 0.3% annualized rate in the first quarter of 2025. U.S. manufacturing contracted for a second straight month in April. The ICM's manufacturing PMI dropped to a 5-month low of 48.7 in April and from 49 in March. I don't know what any of those acronyms are. ISMs, PMIs. I honestly don't know what those are. And I don't want to look it up right now. Sticky inflation. Powell's comments highlighted that the inflation risk is not behind. He underscored that inflation has eased from its levels seen in mid-2022, but it is still hovering above the 2% long-term objective mark. The risks of higher unemployment and higher inflation appear to have risen, and we believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments, said Powell. The Fed's warning on inflation is a significant negative for the market, as it implies that rate cuts could be delayed beyond the expected timeline, weighing on consumer spending, corporate profitability, and overall economic growth. It appears this classic supply shock conundrum is going to keep the Fed on hold until a clearer sign of weakening in the labor market is present, implying the summer could stay dry as far as the Fed's additional easing is concerned. The next Fed move could get delayed to September, said Madhvaya Madhavi Arora, lead economist at MK Global. Number 3, inflation employment conundrum keeps the Fed in a fix. The U.S. Federal Reserve is having to deal with a complex situation of rising inflation and a strong job market. While job growth has been resilient, the tariff war has increased the risk of inflation. Powell highlighted that if tariffs remain at the current level, the Fed may not meet its inflation and unemployment goals this year. What looks likely is that we will certainly see the risks of higher inflation and higher unemployment have increased. And if that's what we do see, if the tariffs are ultimately put in place at those levels, which we don't know, then we won't see further progress towards our goals, said Powell. Basically, yeah, I guess that's him just sort of saying that's him very broadly saying the tariffs are not good, guys. This is not good. It's not going to end up well for us. And if he actually does what he wants to do, I almost guarantee you we're not going to be able to hit our target goals on either unemployment or inflation. And that's a really bad sign. That's a really, really bad sign. Because typically one's overdone and you're trying to tamper down one. Like you're trying to balance the two. But if neither of them have reached the threshold, they're both below the threshold of being able to balance it in that kind of way. That's a serious, serious problem. I can't remember the last time we've been at that kind of place where both unemployment and inflation are above the target rates in such a way that raising or lowering interest rates aren't going to fix the problem. It's probably been a long time since we've been in that position. Powell flagged fragile household and business sentiment regarding economic growth due to tariff policies. A cautious consumer and business mood could hit spending, delay investment decisions, and further weigh on growth. No preemptive rate cut to mitigate tariff impact. When Trump's tariffs hit U.S. trading allies, expectations soared that the Fed would go for a preemptive rate cut to mitigate the economic pain caused by the trade war. That hope has been dashed, and investors now need to wait for inflation to come down substantially and the job market to cool before the central bank considers a rate reduction. Interesting. When Trump's tariff hit, the expectations soared that the Fed would go after a preemptive cut rate to mitigate the economic caused by the trade war. That would I think that would be the first time the Fed has ever done something like that, if they were to have done that, right? They're supposed to be an apolitical entity. They're not supposed to be political actors. They're not supposed to take into consideration Trump saying, I'm going to implement a tariff or I might not. I'm pretty sure they're not supposed to implement all that stuff into their consideration. I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be a strictly economic-based consideration and analysis. Um, Also, I agree with them not doing that from like, there's so many different reasons why it makes sense that they wouldn't do that. they don't know for certain what Trump's going to do, right? He says so much stuff and then doesn't do it. So the fact that he was talking about doing tariffs leading up to his administration or like him taking office, I don't think is anywhere near enough for the Fed to do something like make a preemptive decision like that. And also, furthermore, um, they probably have a pretty good idea of what the impacts of the tariffs would be before they were implemented, right? These are pretty smart people. These are career economists who've been doing this for a long time, but they probably didn't know exactly what they were going to do because we've never done anything like that. We've never put on blanket tariffs on a whole bunch of countries and our allies and stuff. So I think probably to some extent they were like, I guess we just kind of have to see what happens, guys. Like we think maybe it's a good idea to do a preemptive strike here and raise or lower interest rates to try and combat this, but like we don't know for certain what's going to happen. We don't know if Trump's even going to do it. We don't know, and so we just have to let it happen, and then we can't be proactive. We have to be. I think they have to be exclusively reactive. They can only react to what's happening. They can't be like, we think this is going to happen, therefore we're going to preempt this. The small exception being sort of the whole point of raising and lowering interest rates is sort of to preempt potential changes, future changes in the market. They see the market might change a certain way in 6 months, so therefore they raise or lower the interest rates. But that's sort of what they're doing. That's not what I'm talking about. It's not a situation where we can be preemptive because we actually don't know what the right responses to the data will be until we see more data, said Powell. Yeah, absolutely. How are they supposed to know what to do? They probably have some idea of how it was going to turn out and what they should do, but they don't know exactly, and so they had to wait. They have to be reactive to this. That's the Fed's like mandate. Interesting. I'm still like I still think there's a really serious chance of I think there's a very moderate chance of like a mild recession, mild to moderate recession. I think there's probably 30-40% chance of that. And there's also a 30-40% chance that it's all just going to peter out and that we aren't going to have really much of a recession. It's just going to be kind of business as usual for the most part as far as market growth and whatnot. I think there's a reasonable, like not out of nowhere, maybe 10% chance that we're in for a serious, hardcore, like Great Depression style recession. I wouldn't put the percentage super high. I think if we were to start like going down that lane, I think they would probably find some way to like mitigate the damage and turn it from a severe recession into a mild or moderate one. But Trump has shown that he's willing to be stubborn on some absolutely insane things like the whole Kilmar Abrego, uh, El Salvador prison, the due process, and his stubbornness on the tariff situation so far shows to me like it would only take him being stubborn in the wrong moment for it to actually cause a full-on 10% like worst case scenario Great Depression style recession. I think we have a higher possibility of that happening than we have in a long time, probably since the Great Depression. The guy in control of the government right now is completely unhinged, and so it's just like we're all just passengers in the car along for the ride. He's driving and he's swerving and we're all just clinging on for dear life, hoping he doesn't do the swerve too hard that sends the car spinning and off the ravine. Let's read this extra article on it. U.S. President Donald Trump renewed his criticism on Thursday of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, calling him a fool and complaining that the Fed is refusing to lower interest rates. Trump has been on a virtual warpath against Powell in recent weeks, threatening to fire him and then backing away from that threat. He has repeatedly lashed out at Powell in posts on his social media site, calling him a major loser in one post. Trump, speaking one day after the Fed, as financial markets had widely expected, kept its key borrowing rate unchanged, said cutting interest rates would be like jet fuel for the economy, but he doesn't want to do it. He said Powell is not in love with me. So basically, Trump is arguing that Powell doesn't like him and that he's being biased against him, and that's why he's not cutting interest rates. Not because the Federal Reserve has come to its own economic analysis that cutting interest rates would be a bad decision. No, Daddy Trump wants it, and if you don't want to do it, it has to be because you don't like him and it's personal, and that Trump's the victim. Early last week, in remarks suggesting that he is more knowledgeable about interest rates than Powell, Trump said he was not a huge fan of Powell. That's so it is like, bro, it's like the math student and the math professor, and the really naive first day math student thinks he knows more than the professor. It's just so like it's hilarious, honestly, but it's also just like so like it's cartoonish in how like uh narcissistic it is, and how there's no shame. There's just no shame. How can you have no shame in saying that like he's literally out there being like, "Yeah, I know I know the economy better than the head of the Federal Reserve itself." Are you, bro? There's just zero shame. Shame is not even like in his dictionary. The Fed this week kept short-term borrowing costs in the 4.25 to 4.5% range. Is Trump really arguing that like Powell is willing to tank the economy because he has a vendetta against Trump? That's just so ridiculous. Where they have The Fed this week kept short-term borrowing costs in the 4.25 to 4.5% range, where they have been since December. While the big tariffs imposed by Trump are likely to increase both inflation and unemployment, the economy so far has shown little sign of either, Powell said on Wednesday, giving the central bank time to wait until there is more clarity on where tariffs actually end up and assess their effects on prices and jobs. At that point, the Fed can act as needed and potentially aggressively, he said. That's what's so scary about all this tariff stuff, is that the actual true economic impact is delayed by a good 3, 6, 9 months, maybe even a full year to see the full impacts at least. And so it's deceptive because you people could he could do the tariffs, it could be 2 or 3 months out, and not a whole lot has changed, and people could get the false idea that it actually wasn't that bad, but then the train is just pulling into the station, and then it really hits 6 months in or 9 months in, and then, at that point, it's so far down the line that people maybe even have a hard time connecting the tariff policy decisions to the economic downturn. Trump had a different view. Too late, Jerome Powell is a fool. He doesn't. Oh my God, I have to read it in his accent. Too late. Jerome Powell is a fool who doesn't have a clue. He wrote in a post on Truth Social on Thursday morning. Oil and energy way down, almost all costs, grocery and eggs down, virtually no inflation. Cutting interest rates typically boosts the economy, but in a time of above average target inflation, doing so could also unleash an upward spiral of price pressures that Powell has said must be avoided. Trump named Powell as the Fed chair in 2018 during his first term in the White House, and Democratic President Joe Biden appointed Powell to a second 4-year term in 2022. Okay, it's really scary because like the cabinet Trump put together in 2016 and during his first administration is like is like the Eastern Conference All-Star team compared to the junior varsity high school team that is his current cabinet. His current cabinet is a joke compared to his old one. And so it is mildly reassuring that Jerome Powell was appointed during his first term, back when there was at least maybe a few adults left in the room. Um, that's also why it's particularly scary that he is talking about getting rid of him, and he's like floating the idea of firing him, because I would be very worried about who he would put in his place. I have zero trust that he would put anybody that would be even anywhere as good. My full expectation would be that he would put somebody in that has no idea what they're talking about. And I think maybe that's why he hasn't done it so far. I think maybe Trump realizes just how important the Fed is, and just like seriously, it is one of this the table legs holding up the whole country, basically. And so I think maybe that's why he hasn't gone so crazy on it like he has on a bunch of other issues, because he realizes the negative impacts of it could be so much more than all the other issues. Oh, so wait, so they're 4-year terms. So he was appointed to his second term by Biden in 2022. So that means that he's up for, yeah, I saw this. He's up for potentially being replaced in 2026. I think I'm laying down a small prediction right now. I'm laying down a small prediction that if the economy doesn't do great until 2026, if we kind of stay about the same or have a recession, I think Trump will spaz out, lose his freaking mind, fire Powell, and appoint some insane, completely devoid from reality, potentially not even an economist person to head the Fed. And they will do something that legit full on crashes the economy, turns it from a mild recession, uncertain markets to a full on Great Depression style economy. Maybe this is how it actually happens, right? 2026, he replaces Powell with a complete lunatic sycophant who then cuts the interest rates prohibitively low, spiking unemployment rate, or spiking inflation and causing a spiral, some sort of weird spiral situation in which inflation spikes and it perpetuates it would only perpetuate the income inequality and wealth disparity problem we have in this country. That would put that on overdrive, which he has signaled through and through his campaigning on the second term and his second term that he's actually for that. That he wants to go back to the robber baron era of like the 1800s, the mid late 1800s, where there was like a handful of extremely rich guys that basically owned and ran everything, and that we lived in a true oligarchy, and that he wants to bring us back to that. To the extent that we have moved away from that, he wants to bring us back to that. Trump and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said Trump and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer on Thursday announced a breakthrough deal on trade, the first since Trump announced steep import levies on most U.S. trading partners on April 2nd, before subsequently pausing some of them to allow time to reach country by country deals. The first glimmer of uncertainty amid what had been an increasingly foggy outlook makes the Fed actually less likely to cut rates aggressively. That was the read from financial markets, as traders pulled back Thursday from what had been overwhelming bets on a July start to interest rates reductions, with any more than 3 rate cuts by year's end seen as increasingly unlikely. Trump has made no secret of his disaffection with Powell's conduct of monetary policy ever since shortly after picking him as Fed chair early in his first term. Trump's suggestion last month that he would like Powell gone sent stocks and bonds both down as investors priced as both down as investors priced in the chance the Fed could lose its independence and thereby its ability to restrain inflation. Yes, absolutely. The market is in a lot of ways completely irrational. Like you can look at the Tesla stock value and be like, there's no connection to reality here. This is complete nonsense. Okay. But there are a number of ways in which the market is very much connected to reality. And one of them is knowing that part of what makes the US economy so strong is its stability, is its like the way it maintains itself, the way it points people like Jerome Powell to responsibly lower or raise the interest rate. And the market, I think the market broadly understands. It's weird talking about it like this because the market is sort of an ethereal thing and it doesn't have an understanding of something. But to the extent we can talk about it like this, the market has a deeper understanding of like what creates a stable environment. And the market is all about stability. They hate uncertainty. And so they understand that any comment related, like basically anything attacking Powell or anything implying that Trump is going to put in a political ally or something into the Fed is very scary for the stability of these markets. It is inherently uncertainty. This is literally like Trump took uncertainty into a fucking like syringe and put it straight into the veins of the market without any change, right? Like eh, nothing has changed, but simply his comments that he signaling what he might do and his lunacy on everything else is like by all of these put together creates uncertainty. He is uncertainty when he talks about this. He is injecting uncertainty straight into the market's veins by making comments like this. It's so irresponsible. Powell, asked about Trump's criticisms in his news conference on Wednesday, declined to comment. He said he intends to complete his term as chair, which ends in about a year. Powell met a total of 3 times with Biden, Powell's calendars also show he had a 90-minute dinner with Trump at the White House during his first stint there, as well as several other shorter encounters, but has not spoken with him since 2019. Powell said on Wednesday that he never has sought and never would seek a meeting with the president. It's always been the other way, he said Wednesday. Talking to Powell, Trump said on Thursday, is like talking to a wall. It makes sense that Powell wouldn't go to Trump to talk. That's not his job. Powell's job is to head the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve's job is to be reactive to the economy and to pull the single lever they have, the interest rates raising or lowering, to decide, all right, guys, we're going to pull it this way or we're going to pull it this way. That is their whole job. They have to be reactive. Why would he have any interest or reason to have a meeting with you? You, Trump, might have reason to have a meeting with Powell. That's conceivable. Sure, but it's just, of course, Powell wouldn't be going to Trump. There's no, that's just not the mechanisms of the how this works. Trump would be going to Powell.